Hello, this is S.K. Williams, and today I would like to talk to you about religion. I'm not going to be talking, though, about the new atheism. I'm also not going to be talking strictly about academic topics, at least not in the sense of studying the history of religion or its origins, though this video shall be relatively neutral regardless. Lent has begun. This is important because the Christian holiday of Easter, and it is a Christian holiday, it is not a pagan holiday that was usurped by Christians, is a time in which Christians reflect upon the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, and how it has brought remission of sin. This lesson, the lesson of Christ's love, is one that for some reason many of us don't seem to appreciate, especially in today's world in which it is popular to bash Christians and to point out how historically Christianity has been an awful religion, with Christians murdering people for not agreeing, and wars and destruction and oppression being the wake of the Christian faith. This is an unfair way of characterizing the history of Christianity, because it's not really the accurate picture that people would like it to be. But even if it were, even if Christians have been horribly awful people, as many have noted before, the behavior of Christians only reflects upon how evil the religion is if you can prove that their behaviors are consonant with the religion. Of course, people who are critical of Christianity, like modern atheists or neo-pagans, would insist the Bible does in fact teach people to be awful, and it doesn't. But that brings up a good point, and the one I wished to talk about. And that isn't so much the specific theology of Christianity, the one in which Jesus died upon the cross for the remission of sins. Rather, it's about what leads up to the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. It has always been my perspective that Jesus' death on the cross would be meaningless without the 3-year ministry leading up to it. For during those 3 years, Jesus taught us how to live and exactly what it means to follow the way of God. I say the way of God instead of being a Christian, though, because there were no Christians prior to the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, and Jesus himself was not a Christian. Jesus can't be a Christian because that means follower of Christ, and he is the Christ. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think the world would benefit from the message of Jesus. But as noted, this video is not intended to be only a Christian video discussing Christian beliefs, because what I want to discuss now is the teachings of Jesus without the baggage our modern world puts on religion. I think this baggage is rather an unjustified baggage, though. I don't really think religion is this special category and a special way of thinking. I don't really make a distinction between religion and philosophy. I know I'm supposed to, as they are obviously very different. But any difference you point to between religion and philosophy won't hold up to scrutiny. You may say that religion and philosophy have a hard border that clearly defines distinction, but when you get up to that border, you find a lot of exceptions, making the line a bit blurrier. Some will accept that, though. Some will say the border between philosophy and religion is border, and perhaps they overlap, but they're still distinct and obvious. But I don't think they are. I'm not going to go into why, though, not in this video, but I do need to tell you this in advance. Because what I'm going to be discussing is not religion, while at the same time what I will be discussing is religion. What I'm discussing is what Jesus died for. Why Jesus came to offer himself. And at Lent, which is a time when we recreate that event ceremonially, at present Jesus hasn't died on the cross yet. It is still Lent when I make this video, still leading up to Easter. The question is not whether Jesus' death on the cross brought us salvation, and whether his resurrection brought us eternal life, or even whether he resurrected at all. The question is this: what did Jesus teach? And believe it or not, while I'm not one of the modern people who think all religions are the same, they're all paths to God, they're all going to be in agreement, and we should all hold hands and sing Kumbaya, I am also not of the opinion that all religions are in fierce competition and are clearly opposed to each other, and you must pick a religion and believe all others are false. I believe there's more nuance to the world's religions than that. As a Christian, I must, by obligation, reject anything in another religion that contradicts the Christian faith. But that does not mean I must reject every single claim in the religion itself. For example, I'll make up a religion for the sake of argument. Let us suppose that there is a religion called Hutayu. And Hutayu specifically says there are three gods. Not the Trinity like in Christianity where there's one God in three persons. There are three gods. That the universe began on its own, it existed for a long time without anything, and then from the chaotic void, three gods emerged, and through the exchange of esoteric powers, these three gods brought about the universe, and the reason the universe is somewhat tumultuous is because of disagreements by these three gods. As a Christian, I must believe there is but one God. I cannot accept their theology that there are three gods. I can, however, think that because they have three gods, and this does to some extent resemble the Trinity, that perhaps their religion is not wholly wrong. I don't have to say their religion is just wrong, it's garbage, it's worthless, and throw it away. Now, it may be so that they came up with this idea of three gods independent of the Trinity, and it's simply a mistake, and it's a coincidence that there are three, but it could just as easily be that the reason they have three gods is because they had some sense of the Trinity but didn't understand it, so that what they are presenting is a corruption of the Trinity, a misrepresentation, a misunderstanding of it. Either way, it doesn't matter, though. Whether this is a misunderstanding of the Trinity, or whether it's just a coincidence that there are three gods, but it's just something that was made up and wrong, is irrelevant. I still reject the central claim that there are three gods. I reject the claim that these gods came into existence. I reject the idea that God came into existence. But that doesn't mean I must reject everything else. Suppose, for example, that the Watu religion also teaches that if someone is cruel to you, you should repay them with kindness. Jesus said something very similar. In fact, he said basically the same thing. And I do not have to say, you may say the same thing that Jesus said, but you are wrong because your religion is wrong and this teaching is wrong and you must only believe in the Christian version of it. Indeed, I do not view religion as the modern world has come to view religion. I view religion and philosophy as the same thing, and as having considerable overlap with science. I do not believe something is true because Christianity says it is true. Rather, I believe Christianity says something is true because it is true already. In many ways, I view my Christian faith as a scientific model, not a theory. A lot of people would make that mistake. A theory is an explanation of a singular phenomenon, whilst the Christian religion is more than a single claim. It's more like a collection of theories working in tangent together. And I mean theory in the very scientific way. A theory is a model that has been tested and that conforms to the evidence as we understand it at present. I believe that Christianity emerged in the world and developed its outlook based upon the lived experiences of those who lived in the world to which it emerged from, and those who produced the religion. Christianity is not the product of believing something without evidence, as so many modern atheists are wont to say. It is not simply invented by religious clerics. It is something that people lived through and experienced and observed. As such, Christianity developed in the same way scientific theories do. Indeed, all religions have, with the exception of those that are rather obviously false. And by false, this time I mean scams. One of the other great problems with the modern world is the assumption that if you can prove that someone started a religion as a scam to make money, you have disproven religion in general. That's no more true than the assumption that if someone is a quack doctor selling you snake oil to heal you, and that he offers no real medical advice, and nothing that would be beneficial to you health-wise, this means that there is no such thing as medicine. It is an absurd way of approaching it that people nonetheless take. To me, there are fraudulent religions. But I do not believe all religions are fraudulent but Christianity. I believe that most religions are based upon a sincere quest for truth. I simply disagree with certain conclusions that have been drawn by others. Then again, I also disagree with conclusions that have been drawn by Christians. Because contrary to how it is presented, Christianity is no longer a single religion with a single outlook, but a family of religions closely connected and intertwined. In many ways, it is a large family that includes two other broader religions, Judaism and Islam. But even Judaism and Islam have different versions of them that don't really qualify as the same religion as each other. Not all Muslims share the same religion. Not all Jews share the same religion. And of course there is also Baha'i, which was derived from Islam. And there is also the Sikhs, and their religion also derived from Islam. And there's Mormonism. Mormons tend to call themselves Christians, but many reject that label. For the sake of this video, I will accept that they are not Christian, not out of malice, but because they are distinct enough. But I do accept that they are related to Christianity, and that they grew from it. And that is the point, though. Christianity is itself a derivative religion. I do not mean that as an insult. What I mean is that Christianity grew from another religion, Judaism. It did not grow from modern Judaism. It grew from historical Judaism, much like modern Judaism. The truth is, modern Judaism is younger than Christianity, not older. Well, take that back. Modern Judaism is younger than Catholicism. It is younger than Eastern Orthodoxy. It is older than traditions that we tend to call the apostolic traditions. Whether it is older than Anglicanism is quite another matter because of its peculiarities, but technically Judaism does predate Protestant churches, even in its modern form, by which I mean we have the Talmudic Jews. We typically call them rabbinical Jews, and most Jews you know in the West are rabbinical. Still, Judaism, as practiced today, does have a continuity with historical Judaism in much the same way that Christianity does, and both grew from it as the same taproot. And neither would exist without the predecessant culture that it emerged from. You'll have to forgive my cracking voice, I'm still recovering from a flu. And I don't really believe, though, that these religions were just made up, that some group of leaders took a group of atheists and said, "Hey, there's a sky daddy, let's believe in him," either because they were delusional or because they sought power over them or what have you. People have a natural inclination to believing in some sort of god or higher power. The claim that we are all born atheists is not really accurate. That is not to say that you can prove God exists by natural inclination, but it is something that is nevertheless true. And the point I'm trying to make, though, and I know I'm rambling, I apologize, this is unscripted, and as I said, I am recovering from an illness, and still have a lot to do in my life. But the point I'm trying to make is, religious beliefs start in a primitive culture, primitively, and then grow as people think about them and develop them and have more experiences. But while it is true that as we learn things, we adopt new ideas and develop new ideas, it isn't true that this means that we replace older ones by discarding them. The truth is that our new ideas are often filtered through our old ideas, and only replace the old ideas when the old ideas become utterly untenable. And even then, the new ideas must be developed enough to actually function as a replacement for them, meaning that they would have still required the other beliefs for us to have even arrived there. And most of the time we don't even do that. Most of the time we either build upon previous ideas or modify previous ideas to adapt to the new situations or to new observed realities. The ancient world had no concept of religion. I get in trouble for saying that a lot. People say, well, they obviously had religion. Look at all the gods they worshipped. Look at the temples. And all this is true. They did worship gods in the ancient world. They did have temples. They did have rituals. They had sacrifices. They had all the things we know of today as religion. But when I say they had no concept of religion, I'm not saying they did not worship gods. We, in our modern world, tend to define religion as belief in gods and the worship of supernatural powers and what have you, but that's not what I'm driving at. I'm not saying they did not worship gods when I say they had no concept of religion. What I'm saying is they had no concept of the worship of gods being religion. They simply did not define the world the way we do. They did not have this category of thought called religion that religious people had and that some people didn't have, and that some people worked in as clergy and priests, and it was very distinct from philosophy, which was itself distinct from science and distinct from politics and distinct from government. The very compartmentalized nature of modern society that has become so second nature to us, where we have very clear spheres of influence between politics and science and academia and philosophy and religion, all as distinct separate categories that belong in their own world, simply did not exist in antiquity, and in fact did not even exist in Asia until the late 19th century. This is why it is so difficult to tell the difference between Asian philosophy and Asian religion, because the Asians never made such a distinction, and yet we insist upon it being made, and we insist upon it being a natural one that pre-exists before we do, and a very clear divide. But I don't believe it is. I believe that people have engaged in the real world, and it is those engagements, those thoughts that the people have wrestled with, the questions of meaning and purpose and existence, and the lived experiences that we have had that culminate into producing the religions that we have. Contrary to how the modern atheist community tends to characterize religion, it is not the product of sheer imagination, it is the product of many complicated forces, including the observations that people make about the world and the experiences they live through within it. Religion addresses all of the situations one finds oneself in life, and helps to explain why they happen and how best to manage them, if you will. It helps to explain the purpose of our lives, and its meaning. It helps to explain why we exist and where we came from. And for those who think we don't need religion, we have science for that, you haven't really gotten rid of religion and replaced it with science. You have simply made science into a religion. And inevitably, when you make science into a religion, you will add to science things that are not truly science, such as moral judgments, which we see people like Sam Harris doing. And you may insist that because it is science, it can't be religion. By definition, science is the opposite of religion. That which is science cannot ever be considered religion. And yet, this is simply defining a term in order to try and control a narrative. The simple reality is that you can't make something not religion just by defining religion in such a way as to exclude it. And you can't just say that science is defined as the opposite of religion, therefore whatever is in science is not religion, and think that means anything in the context of reality. You're using a semantic argument as if it is a real one. Science does not find itself immune from being a religion simply because it is science. It simply isn't true that if something is science, it can't be a religion. But that brings me to the point that I really truly wished to discuss. If what I'm saying is correct, then you should expect two things. And it's the same things you see in science and philosophy as well. And that would be a broad overlap, while at the same time some disagreement. After all, we have never come up with a scientific theory that has never been challenged, and no one ever agrees on exactly what is true. Yet, because we live in the same world and see the same things and experience the same things, there is a considerable agreement with what is and is not true, just as there is considerable disagreement. We generally start out with the same base observations, and the disagreement comes from interpretation. And quite often, the interpretation is less a disagreement, but more of a different framing of the same situation that may lead to confusion, which is what we see in religion. In fact, that is perhaps the largest point that is to be made. Many claim that all the world's religions teach basically the same thing. This is not true. It is a gross oversimplification. But what is true is that many, not all, but many of the religions that mankind has been involved in over the centuries have taught certain moral principles and certain values that we can observe are indeed beneficial. And there is a surprising regularity at what works and what doesn't, and what is and is not moral. This is where the atheist community likes to say we don't really need the Bible to get our morals. And to the extent they're correct, you could develop the same moral principles as found in the Bible without it. But that doesn't itself mean that the Bible is worthless, which is the gist of their argument. They're basically saying that since we don't need the Bible to discover these moral principles, that means we should not use the Bible. But that's rather like saying, we would have eventually discovered relativity without Einstein, therefore we don't need Einstein's theory of relativity, we can just toss it out and come up with it on our own. The idea that Albert Einstein does not deserve respect for coming up with relativity, because someone else would have if he hadn't, is absurd. And it is equally absurd to say, if these things exist in our world, we would be able to find them without the Bible, therefore we don't need the Bible, is equally absurd. It is also absurd to think that because other religions or other supposedly non-religious philosophies can teach you the same morals, we don't need the Bible. It's obvious that they're just trying to get rid of the Bible and Christianity when they do that. But what is interesting to me, at least in terms of this video, A video that I've actually botched because I've gone off topic, I'm going to have to make a second one, it seems, is that while there is disagreement in exactly how to live and exactly what morals to hold, there are agreements. And concepts like compassion for the poor, to love one's neighbour, to love even one's enemy, to forgive, to live without enmity to any, to strive to give what one can to benefit others, to be humble, to be poor in spirit, to stand not in pride but in humility. These are the values Jesus taught, and they are the values also found in Buddhism and Islam. They are the values taught by the various prophets of the Latter-day Saint movement, starting with the prophet Joseph Smith, in fact. They are the ones that we see taught in Hinduism. They are the ones that we see taught in Shinto and in Taoism. A respect for others, caring for them, doing to them what we would have them do to us, being kind, being good, not relishing in the pain and suffering of others, even if they are our enemy, not to rejoice when our enemies fall. And sadly, we don't really live by this last one. When Osama bin Laden was killed, the announcement was made on the floor of the United States Capitol building, and people stood and cheered and applauded. The monster is dead! Yeah! America prides itself on its Christian heritage. While America is constitutionally secular, the majority of people are Christian, and the Christian faith has certainly been an influence on American civilization. But it seems on a very superficial level when we see people cheering the death of Osama bin Laden. We should not have cheered his death. We should have mourned it. I'm not saying it was wrong to kill him. He was a threat. Sometimes it can be argued that it is necessary to engage in violence and even to kill others in order to safeguard oneself or to safeguard one's people. So I am not being critical of America or the West in general for its retaliations against Islamic terror groups, such as Al-Qaeda or ISIS. But just because we find it necessary to kill them doesn't mean we should be happy about it, and we shouldn't cheer on the floor when Osama bin Laden dies. He was still a man created in the image of God. I'm not saying that to condone his actions or to excuse them, but I am saying that a man died, and we were happy. This is not the way that Christ taught us to be. It is not the way Buddha taught us to be. It is not the way Muhammad taught us to be. It is not the way of the Tao. It is not the way of Brahma. It is not the way of the Great Spirit. And yet it is our way. For as grand and lofty our visions can be when in the gulls of the religion, or those philosophies that insist they are not religious, for secular humanism would tend to agree, would it not? We find ourselves very base, given to quite contrary passions, the impulse to the holy, and yet the compulsion to the base, to the vulgar, to the common. And there we stand at a crossroads. There are two paths to take. The path of holiness, which denies us that visceral pleasure at the fall of our enemies, and the path of the material, which lets us revel in their deaths, revel in the pain of others, to look at those who wronged us and say, "You got what you deserved," to help none that would not help us, and to do only what makes us feel good, and that benefits us, and that brings us gain. Isn't it wonderful to live in such freedom, to live out all of your fantasies, no matter who you exploit to do so? Oh, we may put a veneer of morals on it. We'll say consenting adults, perhaps, or we only harm those who harmed us. But it's all the same. We are giving in to lusts and passions for momentary pleasures that cannot last, and that will eventually bring about our own ruin and the ruin of others. And it stands in stark contrast to the world's great religious traditions, and the way Jesus taught us in the Sermon on the Mount. So what a piece of work is man? During this Lenten season, perhaps we should focus on that holy road, and upon how far we have strayed from it, and how all the world's religions, no matter what their disagreements, all agree that we can and should be better. I have little else to say, so I am going to sign off now. Thank you. God bless, and goodbye.